All right, hello everyone, and welcome. We are at the beginning of week 2, and we have another new project to discuss for this week, and we will also do a review of a couple of the submissions that we received from last week. So you just finished out your first week's assignments. That included the composition for the 2D platformer game and also the sound effects. This week, we have a new game and a new approach with the music. Also needs a new round of sound effects. So we'll start out the session with a discussion of the previous week's submissions, and then we will get into the new assignments and the new topics for week 2. And this first session will be like the rest of our weeks, where we will, the first session of the week, we will start out with a review of the previous week's assignments and then get into the new assignments for that week. So I have, let's see, where do I have it? I have a logic session here that contains the 6 student submissions from week 1. These are the 9 files from the 2D platformer submission, and I hope going through this process will encourage more folks to submit for the upcoming weeks. I always find that it is definitely a good process for the individual. Whoever submits it, you get individualized feedback. You kind of go through all the pieces and parts of your composition, and if you happen to be able to make it for the live session, then you can ask questions and we can discuss any aspect of it. But I also find that it works very well for everybody else, even those that don't submit. Where you get to see a whole lot of other approaches, all the good stuff, the bad stuff, and you probably see ideas and techniques that you wouldn't have even considered for the project. And it shows why there are lots of different composers out there and lots of different clients, and they need a wide variety of different types of music. Even for the same project, you can hear 6 variations, 6 different approaches to how it might be accomplished. So I am going to start with an overview of the assignment, the 2D platformer submission, what we're listening for, what we're paying attention to, and I will talk about, then I'll go into each individual submission that we have. So in this session, I have 6 tracks. Each track represents an individual student submission that contains 9 files. So if this is one of your last names, then you should be able to see your submission up here. And in this grouping of files over here, these are all the main loops. These are a little bit longer. Oh, looks like I've got another one stuck over there. Let's try this again. There we go. So these are 8-bar loops. These are 8-bar long files. And the main loops are going to make up the majority of the soundtrack while the game is being played. The game will randomly choose and rearrange these files in any sort of order while the game is being played and as long as the game is being played. The main thing that we are listening for in these main loops are for consistency, where we want to make sure that it feels like the same band playing the same piece of music, that it is consistent instrumentation all the way across, a consistent mix. Compositionally, you've got the same band playing in the same key, in the same tempo, and the same time signature. Or else it's going to be a sharp change each time it goes from one cue to the next, if it has a strong key change in each one, or if there's a sudden tempo change. So consistency in the composition, consistency in the instrumentation, and consistency in the mix will allow these 8-bar cues to rearrange into any sort of order during the gameplay. You want to, because they are only 8 bars long, and they will be playing during the majority of the time while the player is playing the game, then you want to make sure that you want to avoid repetition. You want to use melodic development to create as much variation or pull as much as you can from these 3 8-bar loops. If you start repeating the same idea over and over again, if you state a 4-bar phrase and restate it again, or just very minutely change it in the second half or in the second 4 bars, then you do that again over 2 other files, then you will feel that repetition over and over again. I've heard 4-bar loops that play back twice. I've heard 2-bar loops that play 4 times in a row, or a 1-bar loop that plays 8 times in a row. You want to avoid that repetition and use the full 8 bars for melodic development and change it up from one cue to the next. There will be a lot of things that are consistent, your key, your tempo, your instrumentation, your mix. So the thing that creates the most development, the most variation, the most change over these 3 files is your composition. Drum pattern might change a little bit, bass line might start playing a slightly different pattern. Nothing wildly different. Again, you want to make it feel like a continuation of the same composition. But mostly the melody is going to create that development throughout these 3 cues. They have to be able to loop. No pops, no clicks, no fades, no gaps, nothing to make the music not feel seamless as it progresses. Three intro files. So this column over here contains the 3 2-bar intros. The intros are meant to build, to rise, and create anticipation heading into the main loops. Wherever you start at the beginning of these main loops, whatever instrumentation is there, what chord you start at, the intensity of the music, you have to consider that's where you are going to end up at the end of each one of these intros. You want to make sure that all 3 of the intros play against all 3 of the main loops. Intro 1 does not necessarily go into main loop 1. Intro 2 does not go into main loop 2. Intro 3 does not go into main loop 3 necessarily. It's completely randomly chosen as it switches from one to the next. Maintain the same instrumentation from the intros through the main loops through to the endings. This you want to make sure you have drums. You want to, whatever the melodic instrument is there, you are using drums, bass, harmony, melody, all of the instrumentation to build up, create that rise, and then often will kind of hang somewhere on a 4 or 5 chord, or getting whatever sort of peak that you build it up to before it drops down into one of the main loops. You want to avoid these intros sounding like loops. A 2-bar intro should not make sense as a loop. Like if I just set up a loop boundary on any one of these intros, it should feel like it rises and then would fall back suddenly every single time it loops around. Sometimes these intros feel like 2-bar loops, where there is no rise, there is no change over the course between the first bar and the second bar. And then the kind of the opposite of the intros, we have the endings, creating the finale, creating the resolution to whatever was going on in the main loops. Again, the instrumentation from the main loops should also be present in the endings. A lot of times I'll hear just the drums will disappear, the melodic instrument will disappear, and it will feel like somebody just left the band right before these endings played. So you want to make sure that you maintain, again, wherever you end up at the end of these main loops, it's going to need to be able to transition into one of these endings. However, you are not guaranteed that it's going to be at the end of any one of the files, but you need to make it feel like it is transitioning seamlessly from one of the main loops into one of these ending queues. It's going to be sudden as it transitions, but the ending of the game is sudden, or at least the ending of that round. You want to make sure that the ending queues reach silence. Like these right here are going to get cut off at the end of the files. Anything that has fade or instrument decay or reverb tails that might get cut off, you want to make sure that they reach silence. These look close. Hopefully those reach silence. These look like they go all the way to silence. These look like they get cut off. These have silence, but might even want to cut it down so that you don't have just extra room at the end. These might reach silence. You also want to make sure that the intensity or the volume that you have in the main loops is sort of present there through the intros and endings. The intros will build up to that volume, the endings will resolve back down. So nothing that has a wildly different mix from one cue to the next. That's really where the challenge of this composition is. I often find that the actual composition itself works and works in the context of the game, but the most challenging aspect is making sure that all three variations of the intros work with all three variations of the main loops or all three variations of the endings. Somebody will have the ability to come up with a nice melodic idea, the correct instrumentation, and might even be able to come up with one or two of the variations, but maybe finding the third one or creating the endings that connect well with the main loops. That's where some of the challenge is, and I find that listening to other people's submissions often clarify things. So we are going to go through these one at a time. We'll listen to, I'll start with the main loops because that provides most of the information as to how the soundtrack will sound. So I'll let it play through and then I'll talk about it after it loops back. And I'm just going to listen to the melodies here. All right, so the instrumentation works. I think the overall pacing works for the game. The main thing would be the repetition of the melodic idea. I was just listening to, you basically have 6 4-bar combinations. You have a 4-bar statement in the front here, and then you kind of change in the second half of main loop 1. You just, state another idea in the first half of main loop 2, and then state another idea in the second half, and the same thing with the first and second half of main loop 3. So, like repeating this idea, I would develop all the way through this 8 bars instead of doing the same thing of you state something in the first 2 bars, then you state it again in the second 2 bars. So you should develop through there. There is a change in the second half of each one of these cues, but then you state the same phrase again. So develop the melodic line. It works to change it through the cue, but each one of these has the same thing in the first 2 bars, then states it again. So there's good changes in the rhythm. The bass line's changing. The lead line is changing. So that's the main thing would be kind of the first half and second half of each one of those cues. Otherwise, it's formatted correctly. It's going to loop properly. It's going to transition well in the game. Here are 3 intros. All right, I think the first one works the best out of the 3. It's got the lead line in it, and it's kind of moving in an upward direction. This one I would, because that lead, whatever that lead instrument is so present in these, in each one of the main loops, and it's also in these 2 intros, I would probably include it through here. Noticeably missing through that one. And then this one kind of goes in a downward direction right at the end. So just kind of the last couple of notes, pick those back up. So it kind of keeps heading in that direction. 3 endings. Again, the first thing would be to make sure they reach silence. They looks like they could probably just sustain forever, so you might have to put a fade at the end of each one of those files, at least not in these bounces, but before the bounce in your actual session. Cool. They all work. I think include some percussion in the third one so that it doesn't just kind of stop there. The phrase works, and so the instructions say to end, well, the cues need to be 2 bars long. And with those cues, the music needs to end within 2 bars. But if the audio file needs to go a little bit longer, like these instruments, it depends on how long you hold the notes or how long the sustain is. You can either, as you bounce it, you can either make sure it ends, or you can put a fade at the end of the file, whatever needs to happen. So the files can be a little bit longer than 2 bars, as long as the music is ending, and then you just capture whatever tail you need to. So I think the endings work well. Again, all of it is going to function properly in the game. Everything sounds like it's going to loop and transition. So just a few tweaks on each one of those. It's some good stuff to start out with. All right, let's take a look at the next one here. Oops. Pay attention. We'll take a listen to these main loops. All right. I loved the energy in it. The marching snare sounds great. Works out very well. The rest of the kind of the bounce to the lower brass and the overall progression works very well. Keeps the energy going. So the main thing I would work on is the development and the change from one to the next. The percussion just feels consistent all the way through. There should be a stronger change from one to the next. The same thing with the kind of harmonic progression. Those instruments, there is a slight change, but it feels like it's missing the development. It feels like it's missing a strong lead line. There's some movement in some of the woodwinds, but you either need to have a much stronger rhythmic and harmonic difference, in each one of these cues, or a strong melody that will kind of overshadow the consistency in the rhythm. So I think instrumentation works, I think overall vibe works, and it's headed in the correct direction, but create more difference, a strong melody and maybe some rhythmic change will definitely help. I also think that you could probably bring out the brass and the woodwinds against the snare drum. You still have a bit more room in the volume and the bounce overall. I think it seems a bit left heavy, and I'm going to guess that the snare drum is panned over there, and the instrumentation, I don't know, might be more over to the right-hand side, or just snares panned to the left. So I might watch out for that in the mix. 3 intros. Yeah, those sound, again, like the other ones, they sound very similar to each other. They're doing the right thing, but you need to have a little bit of different line through there. Just have the melody dance around a little bit more. Like, keep one of them, especially if you add a melodic instrument, kind of maybe a trumpet line on top or French horn line. Will create a bit more variation, but get away from the dun 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 dun. So some more changes in the intros and 3 endings. Cool. There's some stronger changes here. You could probably end some of these phrases a little bit earlier. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Like, just on this beat right here. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, just the same thing there. What is that? Beat 2 of bar 2. Right there. Same place, I think. Dun, 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 dun. Yep. So just end solidly there. One last chord, one last snare hit, and let it sustain to silence. All right, so I love the kind of live bounciness or bounce feel to it. You have some great ideas there. Just kind of develop more from the different variations. All right. So far, so good. Let's take a listen here. All right. So, good changes there, good melodic development in each one of them. There's kind of a thematic idea that develops in each one. I like the rhythmic changes from one to the next. I would say that this second one feels quite a bit louder, or not even much louder, but more intense. Than really even these other two, and it might be for some bass or synth that's in the second one. I think when it switches from the third one back to the first one. All right, so without sitting here and listening to every single layer of it, just making sure that all of the instrumentation is used in each one of the cues. So if you have a layer that is only present in one of them, probably will need to add it even if it's kind of low in the mix in the other ones, so that it helps the consistency from one to the next. Another thing that I hear is that when it switches between these different cues, whatever instrumentation was going on gets cut off. So there's some of these synths have some good sustain through them, but when it switches from one to the next, whatever was happening, there's a sudden cutoff. This one, it works a little bit better from 1 to 2 because there's more instrumentation introduced there. But here, it sounds like everything's kind of sucked out of the mix suddenly. So that's probably because there's a lot of density and sustain in some of these synths. The third one does it too. As it goes back to the first one. So watch out for any of the tails of any synths that would kind of cross over into the next cue. The best way to prevent this is to take every kind of 8-bar loop that you've built and copy all of the MIDI information, duplicate it twice as long, bounce it like that, then cut off the first 8 bars and only use the second 8 bars. And also introducing the similar instrumentation across all 3 of them will help those kind of sudden switches as it goes from one to the next. So these feel a lot quieter, or just even the waveforms you can see here. There's a lot more stuff going on over here, a lot more instrumentation. So make sure to add the same sort of thing. When you add similar instrumentation across all of these main loops, make sure you're also using it in the intros so that it's not a kind of a sudden change. Like if I take these two, see how they sound together. So there's a lot of energy that's added when we go between those two cues. So that can just be resolved with mix and using the instrumentation. 3 endings. All right, I think you can end the drum beat earlier, and I think that would help these resolutions. Oops. There we go. Right? You can just end it on that last cymbal crash. And as long as it fades out, you can end the instructions. Again, they say the 2 bars. You can actually end it earlier than those 2 bars. Just make sure that It extends through that period of time. So you'll have cymbal crash in that last chord. I actually like the kind of extra energy here because you just kind of died and lost the game, lost in the game. Same thing here. Ended on the last cymbal crash. This one doesn't seem to have the same power. It's got the little piano line in there. But could have a little bit more of that percussion, like the first two endings. All right, so overall, works. You have some good ideas there, good stuff to work with. Just some changes and tweaks to how they switch from one to the next. All right, we'll keep going here. Listening to the next set of main loops. All right, I like the instrumentation. I like the feel of it. I think it works against the game. It might be a little too kind of majory and innocent overall for the pacing of this game, but I think everything is formatted, will work correctly. It's going to play back well in the game. I think rhythmically, there's some harmonically, there's some good changes from one cue to the next. I think you could focus on a stronger melodic line through each one of these cues. I am guessing that the instrumentation is there, but you need to have a kind of spotlight on it, a focus on it, to point out in each one of these cues where the melody is. So here, it might be in the bass line, but the piano's got some kind of a good rhythm to it, but it really needs a strong melodic lead instrument there. Here you've got a little bit of kind of movement in the piano, but it's still kind of repeating the phrase. Dum, bum, 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 bum. There's kind of a cadence there that works, but a stronger melody that uses the entire 8 bars to develop its idea. Here you got the organ part that I think could work as the lead, but that definitely needs more volume, needs more presence in the mix. Needs to be brought up against the keys, and the drums are solid all the way through. Bass line also, but whatever that lead instrument is in each one of them, it works if it switches from one cue to the next, just as long as it's also present in the other cues. And just focus on using that entire 8 bars to create a strong melodic change. And I think you've got some good ideas there. And we'll go with 3 intros. Oops. I think the drums end up making these sound like 2-bar loops. There's a little kind of kick roll in there. But overall, with that snare on the 2 and 4, really makes it feel like a loop. Plus the organ is kind of doing this little riff, so moving more in an upward direction. and also using the rest of the instruments. I'm not hearing the bass line or the piano. Let's see if these all kind of do the same thing. It's doing a similar phrase to the first one. Yeah, so use all of the instruments to help rise up. Make sure the drums, maybe don't even use drums in the first bar, but use them kind of as a roll or a fill in the second bar to lead up into those main loops. 3 endings. First off would be to make sure that they actually end before getting cut off by the end of the file. So same idea as the intros. They need to be using all of the same instrumentation as the main loops. Use the bass line, use the piano, and end them a little sooner. Could probably, on each one of these, find a last hit or a last chord. Boom. Just end on that one. Again, it looks like beat 2 of bar 2. Boom. Yeah. So make sure all 3 of these endings come to an end. A little bit more build through the intros, and use a strong melodic theme through each one of those to help with development. All right, we are doing well. Let's go ahead, take a listen to our next main loops. All right. Well, first thing I noticed is that these are 16 bar loops instead of 8 bar loops. So you've got a lot more content there. One thing that you might do, well, number one, it will still work in the game. It is based off of, you can use kind of double time, half time kind of logic around this. So anything that works off of a 2-bar loop will work on a 4 or 8 or 16 or 32 bar loop. So this will play back. I think that you could probably speed up the overall tempo if you wanted to cut these in half, or even have kind of twice as many main loops to work with, so you even have more variations since you actually wrote it. You can use it. You might speed these up. I think the tempo could be a little bit faster to help bring up the pacing of the game. Good melodic development all the way through, maybe a little bit more rhythmic change, and I think if you sped things up, you could do a little bit more with even just hi-hat changes, and you keep the snare on the 2 and 4, but hi-hat and kick drum changes will certainly change up the pattern overall. I think this third one, whatever the lead instrument is and the change is there, then is quite a bit louder. I don't know, well, it might just be, since it's such a kind of a strong synth line, it might just be the sound that it is, but it does feel louder and more present in the mix against the other two, so that should be brought back a bit. So it is your decision what you want to do with the 16 bar loops, and the only reason I say it's 16 bars is because I'm counting on the snare on the 2 and 4. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, and I'm about a quarter of the way through the file there. So chop them in half, speed them up, keep both halves, keep both sets of 8 bar loops. Can certainly work with them. 3 2 bar loops. Yep, this should definitely work. Certainly, I think increasing the tempo. Let's see here. I want to do that. Increasing the tempo will help feed that pace. I think that'll work. Those work, and we'll transition well, and then these 3 endings. Cool. Cool. I like the last chord on each one of them. Definitely puts like a period at the end of the sentence, and each one of these endings should connect well with the main loops. So I think everything will function correctly. It's just a decision of how you want to format it for the game. Yeah, I think the intros and endings work against what's happening in the main loops. All right, one more. All right, let's listen to this one. Alright, well, I think this is has the same issue as the first one, not that it's really an issue, which is that they're 16 bars long. Again, counting on the snares on the 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. And again, I'm about a quarter of the way through. So I would definitely work on more development through each one of these. I can hear that lead almost sounds like this kind of pitched ramped or has a slow pitch, slow attack on the pitch as it kind of ramps up as the lead line in each one of them. And it creates, obviously the rhythm is strong and it's got a good pace to it. Will definitely keep the energy of the game going, but it's really focused on the rhythm and needs a stronger harmonic and melodic instrumentation. You got the bass line. You've got that, whatever that kind of pitched synth is. It also sounds like you have this pluck in there that's kind of repeating on the eighth notes. And but I would like to hear a stronger change from one cue to the next, whether it's a rhythmic change, certainly a change in the lead instrument would definitely help. So a couple more layers of instrumentation to fill out the mix and to give you enough stuff, enough things to work with to create that change from one to the next. You can hear some good rhythmic change in the third main loop. It also feels like it's very heavily based off of hitting those same kind of notes, just in different rhythmic patterns. Using that same instrument. So that's what's creating some of the repetition through there. The fact that it also is 16 bars. So use, again, do the same thing. Chop them in half. Use all 6 8-bar loops and use more instrumentation to develop the lead melodic line. 3 intros. So these are actually 2-bar phrases, but since you're at halftime, they would be 4-bar phrases against the rhythm that you were at in the main loops, but since these are at halftime, they actually are 2-bar loops, which works well. Although you could probably introduce more of the build-up in the second bar of these intro cues to get up to that kind of double time feel in the main loops. Kind of depends on which way you're looking at it. If these are your bass tempo, then the main loops are 8 bars long. They're just a double time, whatever this is. But if the main loops, which are the main ones and are playing constantly, if those are considered the bass tempo, then these are kind of halftime of that. So it all depends on how you want to consider it. These intros could use a bit more of that kind of build and rise in the second bar. And 3 endings. These end up sounding like 2-bar loops because they don't end. They just kind of keep going. If I put them next to each other, I mean, they stop, right? If I did this, they do stop, but they don't resolve. They just kind of cut off. So end them a little bit early, end them on that last solid chord, that last hit, kick drum, snare drum, cymbal crash. Like that cymbal crash should be the end of it. So end them a little bit early. You don't need to extend the rhythm all the way through those 2 bars. All right. Also, these being faster overall, I would kind of do the same thing, where in the in the first bar of the intros, this kind of halftime feel works, but then you start building up to the double time feel in the second bar. Just do the reverse here in the endings. Start out at that double time kind of feel in the first bar of these endings, and then resolve it to an ending all the way. You can either go to this halftime, or you can just hit one final hit or chord and let it end that way. Okay. That's always a good discussion to have as to what tempo you're at. Sometimes I'll have somebody come in and say that they're at 260 BPM. And when you actually listen to it and count the kicks and snares, they're actually at 130 BPM. They're actually half at whatever they are, and it will change the bar count for each one of the files. So it's all, this one is really open for debate because you use both the double time and the halftime kind of feel in each one of them. I think all of the elements work well. You have all of these are set up to work properly. They are formatted correctly. They're set up to loop. They're going to transition. There was a couple of things to discuss about the intros and the endings. Number one, with the endings, make sure that they end. They do reach silence, and you use the intros to build up into the main loops and the endings to resolve back down. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of from this first composition. Great stuff to listen to, good ideas to discuss. Like I said, if one of these 6 was your composition, then I could go through it on an individual basis. But for everybody else, you get to see different approaches to this composition. And again, hopefully it encourages folks to submit for next round. So I'm going to send it over to the archive to discuss the new assignments for this week. You have a new game which requires a new style of music, a new approach to the music, a new setup of the music in the game. If you have any questions with 2D Platformer or the upcoming Angry Bots game, please get in contact with me. But looks like everybody's on track and ready to go into this second week. So thank you very much, and I'll see you again next round. Discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. And the Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where they not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much well, number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is also often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in, and we have to be able to switch musically seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key. Even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. And we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then W, A, S, and D work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right, so ultimately what you will be delivering are 7 audio files, and they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. I'm going to go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long, and those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The ambient, so if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on, so we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot. So it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, "Oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action." And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient queue is playing until somebody takes damage, and at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health, either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. The battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient queue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot, as this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the mech bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. they're bigger and slower and they cause more damage. So typically this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall that might include, or probably should include, a bit of rhythm. So you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the bass tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those 8th notes because kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas, and then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So, yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue, have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So, all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am, just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. And goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. One's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together with the other half of our Angry Bots project. Now that you have finished out the composition, we move into the sound design for this week. And it is very entertaining sound design. Lots of fun stuff in there. It's all weapons and robots and explosions and lasers and missiles. All sorts of fun, kind of interesting sound design for this game. So the approach to doing the sound design is very similar for Angry Bots as it was for 2D platformer. There's less kind of silly sounds and fun sounds that you can just do with the microphone. It's a lot more designed overall, but still got some good stuff to look forward to. So for this, we're going to set it up in much the same way that you did for 2D platformer. I would suggest that you create a brand new session in Logic or your favorite DAW, and you are going to import all of the original sounds from the game. I'm going to create one new track here. And hold on just a moment. Let me go get a copy of the game. There we go. Let's do this. All right. Here is a copy of Angry Bots. And you've already navigated to find all of the sounds and put your own music into the game. But we'll do it like this. We'll go to Show Package Contents. And we'll get a folder called Contents. And we are going to Data. We're going to Streaming Assets. And we're going to Sound Effects. Yeah, I'll just pull these. I think I backed them up at some point. So here are all of the original sound effects. And if I go into, let me do this. Pull this over here. Oops. Move this out of the way. Bring Logic back up. No. Come on, Logic. There you are. I'm going to take all of those sounds that I just found, and I'm going to pull them into a Logic session right here and drop them on a track, and I'm going to tell Logic to put them all on one track, place all files on one track. And then you would probably spend some time separating all of these out. Make your life a whole lot easier as you organize it. But then you would create a couple of tracks directly below. New tracks. And you would build on these tracks. So, like I mentioned before, you would kind of separate these out. Hello. No selection. There we go. Come on, Logic, cooperate with me. There we go. Just make some space in between each one of them so that you have some clear space to build everything and work with the session. I'm just going to switch over here and play the sounds. These are all of the sounds that you will create. There are a whole lot of explosions and doors in this game. So I would, you have access to the Westar library. You also have access to freesound.org. Those are good resources for sound effects, source sound effects to work on this project. And I would suggest that you go find a large group of sounds and bring them in and edit them all in one shot, as opposed to going one at a time. So I would go find, you know that you have quite a few explosion sounds. Flying buzzer, destroyed explosion, patrol mech, destroyed explosion, missile explosion. Figure out all of the certain types of explosion types of sounds that you need. Then go into the search engine and find the particular types of sound effects that you can use, a whole group of them, bring them back into Logic and edit them all down and create different versions for the different explosions that you might need. As opposed to saying, okay, we need an explosion, one sound, going out, finding the sound, bringing it back in, editing it, naming and bouncing it, then saying, oh, I need another explosion. Go back, find another explosion sound, bring it back in. It'll probably save you a couple of trips overall. Westar has been acting up, I guess, because of the traffic. Every once in a while, we run into a message that says maximum number of downloads has been exceeded or something like that. And it is typically reset after a couple of days, something to that effect. So if you are getting issues with Westar, there also is a new login and password that you can find. I think it was set up already when you did the looping assignment, but if not, it's in that, the new password is in that assignment, or it's on FSO. So anyway, you go out and you find your sounds. Let's go ahead and listen to all of these sounds and give a couple of suggestions on your overall approach to this. Let me make sure that everybody will be able to hear these and they won't be too loud, hopefully. Hold on. Let me check my levels. Okay. All right, no problem, Michael. Thank you. Oh, I guess not there. All right, let's see. Let's try that. Let's try this. All right. So this is called airlock door close and then airlock door open. All right, that looks like it's working. So, airlock door open and close. A lot of times you can get away with the close being the reverse of the open, or at least starting with that. Often you need like a ka-chunk at the end as the door actually like closes and maybe locks. But it's a good way of taking a sound and reversing it to be able to get either the open or close that you need, because it always is often a rising pitch to go up and a downward pitch to go down. The next one here, then we have exterior rain and interior hum. Right, these are pretty long samples. Rain, just go out and find a rain loop. Interior hum is often you can look for room tone. That's a very common search term, or air conditioning, or find like an empty office or something like that. So those are longer loops. They need to be able to loop because your player could just be sitting there forever. And they're longer here, but they don't necessarily need to be, your version need to be that long. Flying buzzer destroyed explosion. Here's our first explosion. That is when you destroy the buzzer. Zap electric is when it zaps you. You hear that right at the beginning of the game. Then we have a couple of sounds for the patrol mech. This is the big RoboCop looking robot as it comes after you. This is the alert when it first notices you. Destroyed explosion. This is at least this sound is a massively huge explosion. It kind of works for the big robot. I do think it's a bit of overkill overall, but this is the destroyed explosion. It does have a cool little bit of clipping in there that works for the explosion. Patrol mech footstep 1 and 2. I think they cheat a little bit and they just put the same sound as for 1 and 2. You should probably have a little bit of difference between 1 and 2 so that you can hear like basic. It refers to like left foot, right foot as it goes back and forth. So maybe even just a little bit of pitch difference between the two will give you that variation. Missile explosion. This is when the big patrol mech shoots at you. No, that is sorry. When it sorry, that was missile explosions when it hits a wall. Shoot missiles when it actually shoots it. So those are quite large missile sounds for the patrol mech attack. Enemy spider. This is the alert sound when it wakes up. Then we have, let's kind of move this out of the way, destroyed explosion. That is when you destroy the enemy robot, the enemy spider. This is spider proximity. This is one very short beep. As the spider gets closer and closer to you, it beeps. The beep gets faster and faster. So by proximity, the closer you are, the faster it beeps. The game does all of that for you. You just have to provide one very short beep. If it's too long and it goes it beeps really fast in the game, then it stacks up and doesn't sound. It doesn't work too well. Enemy spider self-destruct when it's a bomb on legs. When it goes off, it has this sound. I think this is a pretty horrible explosion. It's not a very good sound. For for being an explosion, especially compared to the other explosions in the game. Interior door, open and close. This is the close. This is the open. All of the doors in the game are all like futuristic Star Trek doors where you just walk up to them, they move automatically. So it's not, sometimes I hear like somebody grabs doorknob and wooden door opens and closes. That's not what these doors are. These are like some sort of motorized version of that. It needs to, like sliding doors. You can try servos and pneumatics, hydraulics, that kind of stuff, where you get a sort of motorized movement sound. Locked. The next one here is called locked door opening. Maybe. When you hack the computers and you can enter the doors, they automatically open for you at that point. That's just a tone for that. This is when the player gets hit. This is the player shooting the weapon. Now, something to point out with that weapon, and I'm going to look at the waveform over here. This is the player shooting. All right, so is this going to work here? Hello, fader. Okay, so that is the gunshot in the game. There are 12 shots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 bullet shots in this wave file. And your shot, it doesn't have to be a bullet. It could be a laser. It could be a whatever kind of weapon you want it to be. But you should follow that waveform, because I think it's timed to the animation of the muzzle flash in the game. There's a little bit of a light effect that kind of flashes on and off, and you should be able to time the two together. So pay attention to how that sound is set up. The last one here is called terminal hacked. This is when you stand next to the computer in the game. It, again, quote unquote, hacks it. And here, it's a very computery electronic sound. I've heard people do like a voice prompt. They can have it be a robotic voice, even almost like Siri or something like that. It just says, terminal hacked. Or I've had people sound like typing on a keyboard, or again, more kind of computery electronic tone like that. Whatever you find that works the best. So all of these sounds are 16-bit 441K stereo files. You should, again, build all of your tracks and sounds in a single session on multiple tracks. Lay out all of the different wave files across the original ones across a track here. Of course, when you bounce, you will have this muted. These original sounds will never end up in your actual custom sound effects, but they're just there as a guide when you're building everything. So hopefully that gives you some good direction there for your sound design.